Have you ever said a perfectly grammatically correct sentence in English, but the absolute second the words left your mouth, you realized it sounded, well, completely wrong?
Oh, it's just an awful instant sinking feeling, isn't it?
It really is. Like you,
Mhm.
you meant to be direct, but instead it came out harsh or abrasive or even demanding.
Right, you see the other person like physically flinch or their smile just sort of freezes,
Exactly.
and you realize you've just introduced this massive amount of unnecessary social friction into the interaction.
Mhm.
And you're standing there thinking, my verb tense was
Right. I
flawless.
nailed the syntax.
Exactly. The vocabulary was totally accurate, yet the social outcome was just a complete disaster.
And that instant sinking feeling is really what separates um, correct English from what we're going to call comfortable English.
I like that. Comfortable English.
Yeah, so today we are doing a deep dive into this really fascinating transcript of an English learning session. It's a conversation between a teacher named Michael and his student Olivia.
It's a great source text.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack how mastering just three incredibly small words can completely transform how people perceive you.
Because it's those micro adjustments in your language that change the social dynamics, right? Not just in professional settings, but, in your daily life.
Exactly. We spend a tremendous amount of time obsessed with the mechanical rules of language,
Oh, absolutely. We memorize structure, we drill syntax.
but we often forget about the actual human being on the receiving end of those words.
Right, which is what the source material highlights so well. True fluency is, well, it's rarely just about the breadth of your vocabulary.
No, it's almost entirely about emotional resonance, understanding how your words impact the nervous system of the listener, basically. Think about grammar and syntax as like the ingredients of a meal.
Okay, I'm with you.
You can have all the right ingredients perfectly measured out, cooked to the exact right temperature. But the feeling, the tone of your words, that's the presentation.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. Because if you take a beautifully cooked steak and just, I don't know, drop it directly onto the dining table in a messy pile without a plate.
The person receiving it is not going to feel respected?
Exactly. The ingredients are technically perfect, but the delivery completely ruins the experience.
It dictates the entire experience, really. And if we look at the source transcript, this is exactly the wall the student, Olivia, is hitting.
Yeah, she gets so frustrated.
She explains to Michael that she actually knows the vocabulary. She rarely struggles to find the correct words in her head.
But she freezes up in real-world conversations.
Yes, because she is terrified of dropping that food on the table in a messy way. She is paralyzed by this fear of sounding rude.
Which makes sense because the source material shows that learners often construct sentences like, I want coffee, or give me this, or fix your mistake.
Right, and on a purely mechanical level, those sentences are bulletproof.
The grammar is simple and correct.
But the feeling is sharp. It just lacks any kind of social padding.
It creates what we could call diagnostic muddy waters.
Yeah, how so?
Well, if a teacher looks at a written test paper, they might give the sentence, fix your mistake, a passing grade, because, the imperative verb is used correctly.
Oh, I see what you mean. Right.
But in the real world, if you walk up to a coworker and just say, fix your mistake,
You've just damaged a working relationship.
totally. The grammar is right, but you've triggered an immediate defensive response in their brain.
So how do we adjust that presentation? Instead of just listing vocabulary, the text gives us a roadmap based on escalating levels of social risk.
Yes, and it starts with the most common hurdle, right? Asking other people to do things for us.
Exactly. The first tool Michael introduces to soften this friction is the word could.
Which seems basic on the surface.
It does, but the psychological shift it creates is profound. Michael uses this highly relatable physical example.
Oh, the grocery bags one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine you're carrying two heavy bags, your hands are completely full, and you need someone nearby to open a door for you.
Right.
The natural instinct for a lot of people is just to blurt out, "Can you open the door?"
Which, again, is grammatically fine. But the text points out that can you open the door is really just asking about their physical ability.
Right.
You are literally just asking, do your arms work? Are you physically capable of turning a doorknob?
Because can is binary. It's purely functional. But changing just one letter to make it, "Could you open the door?" suddenly shifts the entire atmosphere.
It softens it.
It does. And to
Mhm.
understand why, we have to look at the underlying mechanics. Could is what linguists call a modal verb.
Okay, getting technical.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
It's used here to create a conditional mood.
So by conditional, you mean we're framing the request as like a hypothetical scenario rather than an immediate demand.
Precisely. When you use a conditional tense, you are signaling to the other person's brain that this is a hypothetical possibility.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it automatically lowers their defensive threat response. You aren't demanding an immediate action in their present reality, you're gently introducing an option.
It shows respect for their boundaries.
Exactly.
But, if you are listening to this and wondering if using conditional verbs to ask for a favor is, I don't know, overkill, I kind of share that skepticism.
You think it sounds too formal?
Yeah, I look at this and wonder, doesn't using could make you sound a bit stuffy, like you're in some Victorian period drama being overly formal with your coworker?
That is such a common misconception. People confuse polite conditioning with rigid formality.
Okay, so what is it actually about?
It is actually about collaboration. When you say help me or even can you help me, it sounds urgent. It borders on a command.
Right, it feels a bit pushy.
But adding could and saying could you help me please, it gives the other person autonomy. You change the dynamic from a demand to a respectful request.
It's like giving them a way out.
Sort of, yeah. You're signaling, I recognize you have a choice in this matter, and I am asking you to choose to assist me.
You're giving them the power to say yes rather than ordering them to comply.
Ex-
The transcript applies this to some incredibly common office scenarios, too. Like if a coworker is rushing through a presentation, saying, speak slowly, sounds like you are scolding a child.
It's terrible.
But the text suggests shifting that to, could you speak a little more slowly, please? Or instead of, check this report, it becomes, could you check this report, please?
That minor shift preserves the professional relationship. It allows the coworker to save face while still getting your logistical needs met.
It's highly strategic communication, isn't it? Disguised as basic politeness.
It really is. You lower the social friction so the actual work can get done without triggering anyone's ego or making them feel subordinate.
Okay, that transitions us perfectly to the next level of social risk.
Right.
Could handles asking for an action from someone else. But what happens when you need to state your own needs, your own desires?
This is where it gets tricky.
Yeah, navigating your own ego in a conversation, especially in a professional setting. You don't want to sound like a demanding toddler in a boardroom.
Stating your own desires introduces a much higher risk of sounding abrasive because you're centering yourself.
Mhm.
The text addresses this with the second word in the framework, would. This is the specific tool used to transition from a statement of raw need to a polite preference.
So the difference between I want and I would like.
Yes, exactly.
The transcript uses a simple coffee shop scenario to explain this. I want coffee is basic English and it sounds cold.
Very transactional.
Purely transactional.
Yeah.
But shifting that to I would like a coffee, please, completely changes the energy of the interaction with the barista.
Let's examine the psychological difference there. I want is entirely self-centered. It's the ego speaking directly and unfiltered.
It's demanding.
It essentially demands that the universe bend to its will, but when you say, I would like, you're again utilizing that modal verb to create a conditional hypothetical space.
Removing the raw ego of I want.
Yes, and replacing it with a polished professional wish.
I like to think of I want like a pointed finger. You are poking the other person in the chest with your desire.
That's a great visual.
But I would like is like an open palm. It's an invitation. It's an offering rather than a demand. It says, here is my preference, if it pleases the court.
That open palm approach applies heavily to the workplace, too. Instead of marching up to a colleague's desk and saying, I want a meeting.
Which feels like you're summoning them to the principal's office.
Totally. The text suggests saying, I would like to schedule a meeting. Instead of, I want to talk about this report, it becomes, I would like to discuss the report.
It softens the entire atmosphere of the office. And the source material shows how would flips around to make gracious offers, too.
Right. It goes both ways.
Like if a coworker's struggling with some heavy boxes, you don't just ask, do you want help? You say, would you like some help? You extend that open palm to them.
And when you consistently use this kind of comfortable English, people naturally enjoy interacting with you more.
They might not even consciously realize why.
Exactly. They just feel at ease around you because their brain isn't constantly processing minor conversational threats. You're actively removing the ambient pressure from the environment.
So we can gracefully ask for help with could, and we can smoothly state our needs with would.
Mm-hmm.
Now we cross what might be the trickiest communication tightrope of all, the absolute highest level of social risk.
Oh, yes.
How do you tell someone else what they need to do or correct their mistakes without sounding like a controlling, micromanaging boss?
This is the danger zone. Correcting others is where professional and personal relationships usually break down.
Big time.
The third tool introduced to navigate this minefield is should.
The transcript frames should as the word for friendly advice because there is a massive gap between a command and friendly advice.
A huge gap.
The example used is telling a stressed out friend to rest, take a break, versus you should take a break,
Take a break uses an imperative verb form. It's a direct order.
even if your intentions are pure.
Right. Even if you are deeply concerned for your friend's well-being, the phrasing makes you sound like their commanding officer.
Yeah.
Adding you should turns the imperative into a suggestion. It signals, I think this is a good idea for you, but the choice remains entirely yours.
The workplace example from the text really drives the stakes of this home. Say a coworker makes a mistake on a document.
Okay.
If you say, fix your report, that is a direct personal attack. It immediately puts them on the defensive. But saying, you should check your report again, that shifts the focus entirely.
Because fix your report implies a finalized failure. It
Right.
attacks the person's core competence.
Ouch, yeah.
But you should check your report again implies
Right.
an ongoing process. It focuses on the action, not the person. You're guiding them toward the solution rather than punishing them for the error.
I have to pose a real-world constraint here, though.
Sure.
Even if I say, you should check your report, doesn't that still sound incredibly patronizing coming from a peer rather than a boss?
It definitely can.
Like if my coworker looks me dead in the eye and says, you should check your numbers, I am still going to feel like they're being passive-aggressive. How do we avoid that trap?
That is a very real limitation, and the transcript actually anticipates this exact nuance.
Oh, it does.
Yeah, Michael points out to Olivia that you should can absolutely land too heavily, especially depending on your tone of voice or the existing power dynamic.
Okay, so how do we fix it?
To counteract that, the text introduces extra softeners. It calls them the native nuance.
Oh, right. Phrases like, maybe you should, or I think you should.
Mm-hmm.
Or my personal favorite from the text, the absolute gentlest option of all. You might want to.
That's a great one.
As in, you might want to check those numbers again.
You might want to. It's such a fascinating linguistic mechanism. Think about what is actually happening in our brains when we process that phrase.
You're completely removing yourself as an authority figure.
Exactly. You aren't telling them what to do. You are merely pointing out a possible future desire they might possess.
It gives them the illusion of total choice.
Right.
It makes them feel like fixing the error is their own brilliant idea.
And because they feel like they're coming to the conclusion themselves, they are infinitely more likely to actually follow the advice without harboring any resentment.
It preserves their dignity entirely while still achieving the necessary correction.
Exactly.
So we have this escalating toolkit for reducing friction, could, would, should.
Right.
And the student in the transcript, Olivia, she totally understands the theory, but she brings up a frustration that anyone listening to this can relate to.
Oh, the brain freeze.
Yes. She essentially says, I understand the lesson, but out in the real world, in an actual conversation, my brain just freezes.
It happens to everyone.
The theory completely vanishes when she's actually talking to someone.
Because theory is clean, but reality is messy. When someone asks you a question unexpectedly, your adrenaline spikes.
Your cognitive load increases.
Exactly, and in those moments of stress, the human brain reverts to its most basic, hardwired habits. You don't have time to consciously think about modal verbs or conditional tenses when a cashier is staring at you.
No, you definitely don't. So to bridge that gap, the transcript shifts into what is called the error lab.
This is such a cool exercise.
It is. Olivia is fed bad, overly direct sentences, and she has to clean the feeling of them on the spot. Like, send me the report becomes, could you send me the report, please? Or, I want a new chair.
Yeah.
Becomes, I would like a new chair, please.
The true value of this error lab isn't just the grammar correction, though. It's the environmental simulation.
Right.
She isn't just filling in blanks on a worksheet in a quiet room. They are doing rapid-fire situational role plays to build conversational muscle memory.
They practice the office scenario, but then they immediately go out into the wild.
Yeah, the real-world stuff.
They simulate the cafe. Could you show me the menu, please? They simulate the hotel front desk, dealing with the stress of checking in. I would like a quiet room, please.
Oh, and the airport.
Yes, which is basically peak human stress.
Yeah.
Could you help me find gate B12, please?
By practicing these micro-interactions in simulated high-stress environments, She's rewiring her default responses.
Building that muscle memory.
Exactly. The goal is to make the polite, comfortable English the automatic, subconscious response so she doesn't have to actively think about it when her adrenaline spikes at a crowded airport terminal.
Olivia has this incredible realization during this segment, too. She says she isn't thinking about grammar anymore. She's thinking about the feeling. She realizes it's not grammar practice, it's reaction training.
That realization is profound. Fluency does not come from memorizing a massive, complex grammar chart.
No.
True fluency comes from practicing small, highly useful patterns again and again until they become automatic.
It's about deeply understanding how your words are going to land in another person's ears.
Yes, and intuitively adjusting your patterns so they land softly. You learn to serve the dish so the other person actually wants to eat it.
You are proactively removing the friction from the interaction. And when you remove the linguistic friction, people are naturally more cooperative, more patient, and just more willing to help you.
Let's recap this simple map we can all take away from this transcript.
What's it?
It basically boils down to 3 micro adjustments for your daily life. When you are navigating the social risk of asking for a favor, use could.
Could. Got it.
When you are expressing your own desires or making offers, use would.
Would.
And when you need to offer friendly advice or correct someone without sounding like a dictator, you should. And, maybe throw a might want to in there for good measure.
It is such an elegant framework. And, if you are a native English speaker listening to this, do not write this off as just a lesson for language learners.
No, definitely not.
We are all guilty of firing off a frantic email that says, send me the file, or barking, I want a coffee at a barista when we are distracted or running late.
I know I've sent messages that were way too direct just because I was in a rush, and I definitely had to go do damage control later.
Oh, same. We've all been there.
Taking that extra half second to use comfortable English makes the people around you feel at ease. It makes them feel respected.
Absolutely.
Whether you're frantically looking for your gate at the airport, ordering a latte at a busy cafe, or trying to negotiate a tight deadline with a stressed-out coworker, these 3 little words act as a social lubricant. They just make human connection smoother.
Because communication isn't just about the transfer of information, right? It's about the management of relationships.
Perfectly said.
Every time you speak, you are either depositing into a relationship's bank account or you're withdrawing from it. Conditional softeners are deposits.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought to mull over. We've just seen how swapping out 3 tiny, seemingly insignificant words can completely alter the amount of respect, warmth, and collaboration someone feels from us.
It's pretty amazing.
Which makes you wonder, what other unconscious linguistic habits are you carrying around every day?
Oh, that's a good question.
What other tiny words are secretly dictating the quality of your relationships, your career, and your daily interactions without you even realizing it?
It is a question that makes you want to listen a little closer to your own conversations tomorrow. It is time we stop just throwing the ingredients on the table and start thinking a little more about the presentation. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.